It was a crisp autumn morning in 1983 when Bishop Harold Whitaker stepped out of his modest chapel in a quiet town nestled deep in the heart of Missouri and vanished. No warnings, no goodbyes, no clues. One moment, he was leading prayers, comforting souls, and guiding his community, and the next he was simply gone. His disappearance shattered the town. Mothers whispered about it in the markets. Children grew up hearing the eerie story of the bishop who walked out of God's house and never returned. Some believed he fled. Others were convinced something far more sinister had happened within those very church walls. But what if I told you that for nearly 3 decades, there was a secret hidden in plain sight, a silent witness to everything that happened that day? For 27 long years, a simple wooden panel held the answer that no detective, no priest, no family member could ever uncover. It waited untouched, unseen, until a carpenter, working on a routine renovation, pulled it loose and froze. There, perfectly folded behind the wall, was Bishop Whitaker's robe. The same robe he wore the morning he disappeared, pristine, unstained, as if placed there intentionally. Imagine the wave of dread that washed over that carpenter. His hands trembled, his breath caught, because suddenly, the decades-old mystery wasn't just a story from the past. It was real, staring back at him from the shadows of forgotten wood. What was the bishop's robe doing sealed behind a wall no one had touched for years? Who put it there? And why? As news of the discovery spread like wildfire, the town was forced to reopen old wounds. Neighbors began recalling strange things they had long buried. Whispered arguments behind church doors, the sudden departure of a choir boy weeks before the disappearance, and the strange visitor seen lingering near the chapel days prior. Each memory became a puzzle piece. Pieces that, when assembled, revealed a truth far darker than anyone was prepared to face. Today, you are about to uncover the untold story behind the bishop's mysterious vanishing. What really happened inside that chapel? Was it betrayal? Was it sacrifice? Or something far more chilling than anyone ever imagined? Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you'll understand why this robe wasn't just fabric. It was a message, a silent scream from beyond the wall. The day before Pastor William vanished seemed like any other. The sun rose gently over the small town, casting a warm glow on the modest wooden church that had stood there for over 80 years. Locals gathered early that morning, as they always did, exchanging smiles, hugs, and prayers. Pastor William had delivered one of his most powerful sermons yet, a message about forgiveness, about secrets, and about the weight of truth. Strangely enough, some would later recall that his eyes looked different that day, tired, heavy, as though he carried a burden far greater than anyone realized. After the service, he lingered longer than usual. He walked slowly through the pews, running his fingers along the worn wood, pausing to gaze at the stained glass window depicting the Good Shepherd. Witnesses said he looked conflicted, as if debating whether to say something, as if torn between 2 impossible choices. No one questioned it at the time. Why would they? He was the pastor, the man everyone trusted with their confessions, their grief, and their deepest wounds. But behind the gentle smile, Pastor William was a man at war with himself. For weeks leading up to that day, strange things had begun to happen. Envelopes with no return address appeared on his doorstep. Phone calls where no one spoke on the other end. A sense that someone, or something, was watching him. At first, he dismissed it. Maybe just pranksters, he thought. But deep down, he knew. These are not accidents. They were warnings. That evening, long after the church had emptied, William sat alone in his office, staring at a sealed envelope that had arrived earlier that day. Unlike the others, this one was different. Handwritten, personal, his name etched in hurried strokes on the front. His hands trembled as he held it, the paper cold against his skin. Something told him that whatever was inside would change everything. And yet, for reasons only he knew, he didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he slipped the envelope between the pages of his hymnal, a book that had accompanied him through every baptism, every wedding, every funeral, and every tear-filled prayer. He closed it gently, almost reverently, as though hiding something sacred or dangerous. Moments later, he walked out of the church. Not a single soul saw him leave. And from that moment on, as the years stretched on, the memory of Bishop Whitaker became more legend than reality. New priests came and went, but none could truly fill the void he left behind. The chapel itself seemed to change, once vibrant, now shadowed. Attendance dwindled. Families moved away. Those who stayed avoided speaking of that day, as if uttering his name might awaken something best left buried. But beneath the town's surface, the mystery refused to die. There were always anomalies, strange events that locals struggled to explain. Lights seen flickering inside the chapel long after it was locked. Shadows moving past stained glass windows when no one was inside. A child once claimed he heard someone softly humming a hymn from behind the church walls. But when his father checked, there was nothing. Just silence. The kind of silence that suffocates. Then there were the letters. Over the years, anonymous envelopes appeared, slipped under doors, left on church pews, tucked into library books. Each contained cryptic Bible verses, half-finished prayers, or chilling phrases like, "The truth is hidden where faith was built." No one knew who sent them. Some thought it was a cruel prank. Others believed it was the bishop himself, trying to speak from wherever he was. In 2010, the church finally underwent major renovations for the first time since his disappearance. The roof was leaking. The walls were crumbling. A local carpenter, Samuel Briggs, was hired to lead the project. Samuel wasn't just any carpenter. He had grown up hearing the story of Bishop Whitaker. As a child, his grandmother would tell him, "The bishop didn't leave, Sammy. The church kept him." Those words always haunted him. But standing there now, hammer in hand, he never imagined they might be more than just a scary bedtime tale. On the third day of work, while dismantling an old wooden panel behind the pulpit, Samuel noticed something odd. The nails on that particular section weren't like the others. They were older, rusted, hammered from the inside, not the outside. His gut twisted. With a single, careful pull, the panel came loose, and what he saw behind it made his knees buckle. Folded perfectly, as if placed with reverence, was Bishop Whitaker's ceremonial robe, untouched by time. The deep crimson sash still vibrant, and tucked beneath it was something else, something that would change everything. For a long moment, Samuel simply stared. His hands trembled uncontrollably, his breathing shallow and erratic. It was as though the air itself had thickened around him. The robe wasn't dusty, nor was it decayed. It was pristine, as if it had been placed there just yesterday. And then his eyes caught something else, partially hidden beneath the folds of the fabric, a small leather-bound journal. Its edges were worn, its cover cracked by age, but it was unmistakably the bishop's. Samuel had seen it once as a boy, carried close to the bishop's chest during every sermon. With trembling fingers, he opened the journal. The first few pages were filled with familiar passages, prayers, sermon notes, reflections on faith. But as he turned the pages, the handwriting changed. It became hurried, frantic, words scratched in uneven lines, as though written in fear and haste. Phrases like, "They are watching," and "Evil wears a collar," leapt from the paper. On one page, scrawled larger than anything else, were the words, "If they find this, it means they silenced me." Samuel felt the room spin. His mind raced. Who was they? Was the bishop hiding from someone? Or, worse, was someone hiding him? He flipped to the final entry, dated the very morning the bishop disappeared. The words were almost illegible, stained with what looked like water, or tears. It read, "I confronted him. He knows that I know. If I don't come back tonight, the truth is behind the altar." Samuel snapped his head toward the heavy stone altar just a few feet away. His heart thudded so violently it echoed in his ears. Every instinct told Samuel to run, to drop everything and pretend he had never seen it. But something stronger held him there. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the same kind of courage that Bishop Whitaker once preached about. Steeling himself, Samuel approached the altar. At first glance, it seemed solid and movable. But as he ran his hands along the base, he felt it. A hairline crack. A hidden seam that no one would notice unless they were searching for it, or unless they had been told exactly where to look. Slowly, Samuel pushed. The altar shifted. Not by much, but just enough to reveal a hollow space beneath. And inside that dark cavity lay something far more horrifying than he was prepared to find. Inside the hollow space beneath the altar was a small, decaying wooden box, its hinges rusted, its surface marred by time. Samuel hesitated before opening it, his palms slick with sweat. With a deep breath, he forced the lid open, and what lay inside nearly sent him collapsing to the floor. Bones. Small, fragile bones, too small to belong to an adult. A child. Alongside the remains was a silver crucifix, and beneath it, another note. This one was barely legible, written in the same frantic hand as the journal. It read simply, "Forgive me. I tried." Samuel stumbled back, gasping, his mind unraveling. Who was this child? Was this connected to the bishop's disappearance, or something even darker? A million thoughts flooded his head. He remembered the old rumors. The choir boy who vanished just weeks before the bishop did. A boy named Matthew. No one had ever found him. No one had ever explained how a child could simply vanish from a small town where everyone knew everyone. A horrible realization dawned. Was the bishop trying to protect that boy? Or was the boy a victim of something that the bishop himself had tried to expose? Samuel's hands trembled as he pieced it together. The sermons about confronting evil, the whispered arguments, the strange visitors. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't coincidence. Something horrific had happened within these sacred walls. Suddenly, a memory flashed in Samuel's mind, something his grandmother had once told him. There are places where light and darkness collide, where even those who wear the cloth aren't always servants of God. At the time, it sounded like the ramblings of an old woman. Now, it felt like a warning he had ignored until it was too late. Samuel knew he couldn't keep this to himself. But who could he trust? The town's leadership, the church elders. Many of them were the same men, or the sons of the men, who were present when the bishop disappeared. If this was covered up for 27 years, who was truly innocent? And who still had something to hide? As Samuel stood in the dim light of the chapel, robe in one hand and the brittle box of bones in the other, his mind was a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. His gaze darted to the stained glass windows, half expecting a shadow to pass, someone watching, listening. Every sound, the creak of old wood, the whisper of wind against the stone, felt amplified, sinister. What was once a house of God now felt more like a vault of secrets, echoing with the ghosts of the past. Memories came flooding back. The strange look Father Aldrich had given him as a child whenever someone mentioned Bishop Whitaker. The way the elders always avoided discussing that year. It all seemed connected now. Pieces of a puzzle that no one was ever meant to solve. Samuel began to realize, finding the robe wasn't the end of the mystery. It was just the doorway into something far darker, something that had festered beneath this town for nearly 3 decades. A sudden crash startled him, a loose panel falling from the choir loft above. His heart nearly stopped. He wasn't alone. Samuel scanned the room, every muscle tense, waiting for movement. But nothing. Just the suffocating silence again. Or was it? Beneath the quiet, there was something, a faint ticking, rhythmic, deliberate. Following the sound, Samuel traced it to an old grandfather clock near the chapel's entrance. A clock that, according to everyone, had stopped ticking the morning the bishop vanished. Approaching it cautiously, Samuel placed his hand on the polished wood. The ticking grew louder, almost mechanical now. He opened the glass face, expecting broken gears, but instead, he found something tucked behind the pendulum. A key. Small, iron worn by time. Tied to it was a ribbon, faded but unmistakably the bishop's ceremonial sash color, deep crimson. Attached to the ribbon was a note, nearly unreadable. When the clock strikes, look beneath. Without thinking, Samuel yanked the key free. His eyes scanned the room. Beneath what? The pews? The pulpit? His gaze landed on the floor itself. The old stone tiles, slightly uneven. Suddenly, one tile near the bishop's old confessional seemed wrong. It was newer, different. His pulse surged. Kneeling, he felt along the edges. And there it was. A keyhole. Hidden. Waiting. The key fit perfectly, turning with a heavy click that echoed through the empty chapel like a gunshot. The tile shifted, revealing a narrow, pitch-black passage descending beneath the church. The smell hit Samuel first. Damp, earthy, mixed with something older. Something metallic. Something that smelled like time itself had rotted away down there. Despite every instinct screaming at him to stop, to leave, he pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight, illuminating the crude stone steps leading downward. As he descended, the air grew colder, denser. The walls were rough, carved by hand long ago, their surfaces etched with symbols, crosses, circles, but also strange markings Samuel didn't recognize. His light caught fragments of broken wood, rusted nails, scraps of fabric, as if this passage had been used many times before. But for what? At the bottom of the stairs, the passage opened into a hidden chamber. Samuel's breath caught. The room was small, barely wide enough to stand. On the far wall hung dozens of photographs. Old, yellowed, curling at the edges. Faces of children. Some smiling, some serious, some clearly terrified. Beneath each photo was a name and a date. His eyes scanned them in horror. One name stood out instantly. Matthew Carter, the choir boy who vanished in 1983. His photo was there, along with the date of his disappearance. But that wasn't the worst part. At the center of the room stood a single wooden chair, bolted to the floor, with worn leather restraints hanging from its arms. Next to it, a shelf filled with dusty journals, labeled by year. Samuel's hands trembled as he pulled one from 1979. Opening it, he found line after line of detailed records, dates, names, times, and descriptions. Descriptions of punishments, confessions, things no decent human could ever imagine, let alone write down. It was then Samuel understood. This wasn't just a secret room. This was a vault of horror, a place where unspeakable acts had been committed in the name of what? Discipline? Salvation? Or something far more depraved? The bishop had discovered this. He had confronted someone about it, and that confrontation had cost him everything. Samuel staggered backward, gripping the journal like a lifeline as his eyes scanned the suffocating walls of the chamber. Each photograph felt like a scream frozen in time, each journal a testament to horrors too monstrous for daylight. His mind fought to reject what it was seeing. This couldn't be real. This couldn't have existed right beneath the feet of an entire congregation, hidden by hymns and hollow sermons for nearly 3 decades. As his light flickered across the stone walls, something else caught his attention. A large wooden cross mounted upside down, its base buried deep into the floor. Beneath it, engraved in the stone, was a phrase written in Latin, Fiat lux in tenebris, let there be light in the darkness. But this didn't feel like light. This was the embodiment of every shadow ever cast within those walls. Driven by a mixture of dread and duty, Samuel moved toward a locked cabinet tucked in the corner. Its surface was scarred, as if someone had tried to destroy it but failed. Using a broken piece of metal from the restraints, he forced the latch open. Inside were stacks of documents, birth certificates, baptism records, and, shockingly, death certificates. But they were incomplete. No official seals. No signatures. Only names. Names of children no one ever remembered, or perhaps chose to forget. There, at the very back, hidden behind the papers, was a sealed envelope. Faded. Brittle. On the front, in the bishop's unmistakable handwriting, it read, "If found, tell them the truth was always here." With trembling hands, Samuel tore it open. Inside was a single, handwritten letter. It detailed how Bishop Whitaker had stumbled upon this room by accident while searching for a missing child, how he had confronted those responsible, how he had begged for the truth to be exposed, but instead they threatened him, and when he refused to be silent, they made him disappear. The final line of the letter was etched so deep it looked as though the pen had nearly torn the paper. "The wall holds more than my robe. It holds the sins they hoped would die with me." Samuel felt his chest tighten. Was there more behind the wall? Had he only uncovered a piece of the darkness? His instinct screamed this wasn't over. Fueled by a sickening mix of fear and determination, Samuel raced back up the stairs, clutching the letter like it was his last grip on reality. The chapel above felt different now. No longer a place of worship, but a crime scene that had been masquerading as holy ground for nearly 30 years. His eyes scanned the pulpit, the choir loft, the walls. Where Where's the rest of it? What was the bishop trying to lead him to? His gaze locked on the old confessional booth. It stood there, innocuous, worn, its curtains moth-eaten and faded. But something about it felt wrong now. Wrong in a way Samuel couldn't explain. He stepped closer. The smell hit him first. Not decay but dust, old wood, and something else. Something metallic. He pushed open the door. Inside, the usual, the wooden seat, the sliding panel for whisper confessions. But his eyes caught it. The floorboards beneath the priest's seat were different. Slightly warped. Recently disturbed. Dropping to his knees, Samuel pried at the edge. The board lifted with a reluctant groan, revealing yet another hidden compartment. But this wasn't empty. Inside was a box, smaller than the one beneath the altar, wrapped in cloth embroidered with the same crimson cross from the bishop's robe. Slowly, he unwrapped it, and what lay inside stole his breath entirely. A tape recorder. Old. Battery-operated. Alongside it, a note written in hurried script. If you hear this, the truth is no longer silent. With trembling fingers, Samuel pressed play. The tape crackled, hissed, and then a voice. The bishop's voice. Desperate. Fearful. If anyone finds this, they'll know. They'll know what's beneath this church. They'll know what was done to those children. They'll know who wears the mask of God. A sudden loud bang on the tape. A door, a struggle, and then silence. Samuel's hands shook so violently, he nearly dropped the recorder. But before he could even process what he'd just heard, a new sound sliced through the silence. Footsteps. Heavy, slow, measured. Someone else was here. Someone who knew exactly what Samuel had just uncovered. Samuel's breath hitched as the footsteps grew louder, echoing against the chapel's stone floor. His heart pounded so violently that he could barely hear anything else. He spun around, frantically scanning for somewhere to hide, but there was nowhere safe in a place like this. The very walls that once promised sanctuary now felt like they were closing in on him, suffocating, betraying him with every echo. A shadow flickered past the stained glass window. Then another. Not one person, but two. Maybe more. Samuel gripped the tape recorder tightly against his chest, as if the mere possession of the bishop's voice could shield him from what was coming. But deep down, he knew, whoever was out there wasn't just looking for him. They were looking for what he now knew. They had kept this secret buried for nearly 3 decades. And secrets like this don't get unearthed without consequences. The main door creaked open. Heavy boots scraped across the floor. Samuel ducked behind the pulpit, pressing himself against the cold wood, barely daring to breathe. Muffled voices floated through the air, low, gruff, panicked. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Fear. Not the fear of being caught, but the fear of losing control. The fear of a secret slipping through fingers that had clutched it too tightly for too long. As he steadied his breath, Samuel noticed something strange, a draft. A gentle, cold breeze brushing against his neck. He glanced down. A gap. A small one, right behind the pulpit, partially hidden by an old rug. He ripped the rug back, and there it was, a narrow crawl space. Tight. Cramped. But led somewhere. Anywhere. Anywhere was better than being found. Without thinking, Samuel slid inside, dragging the robe, the journal, and the recorder with him. The walls squeezed his shoulders. Dust filled his throat. He crawled deeper, the voices growing fainter behind him. But then up ahead, something. Light. Faint. Flickering. And as he pulled himself toward it, a terrifying realization struck him. This wasn't just an escape tunnel. This was another hidden room. The crawl space opened into a small chamber, far older than anything else he had seen. The stone was different, rougher, primitive. Candles lined the edges, melted down to stubs. And in the center, a table. Not a table for meetings. Not for worship, but an altar. A crude one. Its surface was stained dark. Not from age, but from something else entirely. Surrounding the altar were symbols carved deep into the stone. Circles interwoven with crosses. Strange runic patterns that sent a chill through Samuel's spine. This wasn't Christian iconography. This was older, or corrupted. A perversion of something sacred, twisted into something unrecognizable. A ledger sat on the altar, bound in leather, its edges cracked and brittle. On the front, a symbol Samuel now recognized from the hidden chamber upstairs, the inverted cross inside a circle. With shaking hands, he opened it. The pages were filled with names. Names of congregants, names of priests, names of children, dates, rituals, transactions. It read less like a religious record and more like an accounting of sin. Line after line detailed offerings made in secrecy, penance through silence, and horrifying phrases like the debt paid in flesh. Samuel's stomach churned. This wasn't just about the bishop. This was an entire system, a machine of darkness masquerading as a house of light. Suddenly, a noise jolted him back to the present. A sharp clang from the crawlspace behind him. They had found the rug. They were coming. Panic surged. His eyes darted around the chamber, searching for anything, any exit. And that's when he saw it. Another panel. This one wasn't stone. It was wood, newer than the rest. He scrambled to it, pressed against it, and it shifted. A hidden passage. Another one. How deep did this labyrinth go? Samuel pushed it open and stepped into darkness. But this wasn't like before. This wasn't a room. This was a staircase. Leading down. Samuel descended the staircase cautiously, each step groaning beneath his weight, as if warning him to turn back. But it was too late for that now. Whatever lay below was part of the truth the bishop had died trying to reveal. The air grew heavier, colder, saturated with a moisture that clung to his skin like icy fingers. His flashlight flickered, struggling against the suffocating darkness that seemed to absorb the light itself. At the bottom of the stairs, the space opened into an underground crypt, but not the kind built to honor the dead. This was different. The walls were lined with shelves, each one holding boxes, bags, and what appeared to be personal belongings, shoes, necklaces, children's toys. Samuel's throat tightened. These weren't storage items. These were relics, memorials, or worse, trophies. In the center of the room stood a stone pedestal. On it, a large black-bound book rested, sealed with a brass clasp in the shape of a serpent consuming its own tail. Beside the book, a small wooden chest sat, half open. Samuel leaned closer, and his heart nearly stopped. Inside were dozens of teeth, tiny, fragile, unmistakably belonging to children. His stomach twisted as bile rose in his throat. How could something like this exist under this church? He opened the book with trembling hands. The first page was a ledger of names, but not of the victims. No, these were the names of those involved, the caretakers of this darkness, elders, priests, town officials, even some families he recognized, people who smiled in public, people who shook hands, gave sermons, led charity drives. Their names were inked here beside notes like witnessed, participated, paid in full. A sudden realization hit Samuel like a sledgehammer. This wasn't just a cover-up. This wasn't a crime of passion or a mistake buried in shame. This was systematic, generational, an inheritance of evil passed down like property. The bishop had discovered this, and now Samuel had too. But as Samuel stood frozen in horror, another sound pierced the suffocating silence, the unmistakable groan of the staircase above. Someone else was descending, not in a hurry, not in panic, slowly, deliberately, a pace that conveyed absolute control. Whoever was coming wasn't afraid. They knew this place. They belonged to it. Samuel's pulse thundered in his ears. His flashlight darted around the crypt, desperate for another exit. Anything. And then he saw it. A narrow fissure in the stone wall, barely wide enough for a grown man to squeeze through. But it was something. Without thinking, he shoved the journal, the bishop's letter, the tape recorder, and the robe into his backpack, clenching it tightly to his chest. He slipped through the crack just as footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. Wedged between the jagged stone, Samuel barely dared to breathe. On the other side, he could hear voices, low, grim, familiar. One of them unmistakably belonged to Father Aldridge, the same priest who had served this town for over 40 years. The same man who had delivered eulogies with tears in his eyes, led prayer groups, blessed newborns. It's gone. Aldridge's voice grumbled, full of restrained fury. He found it. Another voice responded, colder, sharper. Then you know what comes next. Silence followed. No arguments. No hesitation. As if what they were discussing was as normal as planning a Sunday service. Samuel's breath caught. They weren't debating whether to act. They were deciding how. He squeezed further through the gap, his skin scraping against the rock, ignoring the sting of blood on his arms. On the other side was a tunnel, older than the rest, lined with roots breaking through the damp earth. He stumbled forward, gasping for air, until something ahead caught his eye. Daylight. Faint, flickering, a way out. But even as he scrambled toward it, a dark, paralyzing thought gnawed at the edges of his mind. If this has been hidden for 30 years, how deep does it really go? How much of his town, his community, his entire life was built atop this nightmare? Samuel pushed forward, scrambling through the narrow tunnel, his hands and knees sinking into the damp earth. The faint glow of daylight grew stronger with each agonizing step, but so did the pounding in his chest. Not just from fear, but from the suffocating realization that nothing he once believed about his town, his church, or his own childhood was real. Every birthday spent in that chapel, every communion, every whispered prayer, all of it was built upon this graveyard of secrets. As he emerged from the tunnel, Samuel tumbled onto a steep embankment behind the church grounds, hidden by a dense thicket of trees and overgrown brush. For a brief moment, he just lay there, gasping, shaking, his hands clawing at the dirt like someone drowning, desperate to convince himself that he was back in the real world, that this nightmare had boundaries. But deep down, he already knew. The boundaries were long gone. His eyes scanned the tree line, searching for any sign that he had been followed. Nothing. No voices. No footsteps. Just the eerie hum of the wind weaving through the leaves. But even that felt different now. Unnatural. Like the land itself had absorbed too many screams, too many secrets, and was now cursed to echo them forever. Samuel wiped the dirt and blood from his face and opened his backpack. There they were, the bishop's robe, the journal, the letter, the tape recorder, and that horrific ledger from the crypt. Physical proof. Proof that should have never existed. Proof that could burn the entire town to the ground if it ever saw daylight. And with that realization came something even colder. A target had just been painted on his back. As he zipped the bag shut, a new sound made his blood run cold. A car engine. Not distant. Close. Too close. Tires crunching on gravel. Voices. And then silence. The kind of silence that meant one thing. They knew he was out. Samuel dropped to his belly, crawling deeper into the underbrush as the car doors slammed shut. He could hear them. Methodical, calculated footsteps moving in separate directions, flanking the area. These weren't random searchers. They knew the land. They knew exactly where the tunnel exited. This wasn't the first time they had hunted someone like this. A voice pierced the quiet. Low. Calm. Almost rehearsed. Samuel, we just want to talk. It was Father Aldridge. His voice still carried that same familiar warmth he'd used during sermons, weddings, and funerals. A voice designed to comfort, to calm, now warped into something sinister. There's been a misunderstanding. Let's not make this harder than it has to be. Samuel gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stay still. He watched through the branches as 3 figures moved slowly through the clearing. One of them holding a flashlight, the others scanning the ground for footprints. They were patient, methodical. They weren't rushing because they didn't have to. They knew the woods, and they knew that Samuel, bloodied, exhausted, terrified, couldn't get far. His mind raced. Where could he go? The town? No, half the town was probably part of this. The sheriff? Out of the question. His own home. They'd be waiting there. A bitter truth settled into his bones. The only person he could trust now was himself. He slid backward, deeper into the brush, inch by inch, his heart hammering so loudly he was sure they could hear it. Every crack of a twig beneath his knee felt like an explosion. But he kept moving. Survival wasn't optional anymore. It was instinct. Because somewhere in that backpack wasn't just evidence. It was the key to exposing decades of evil. Or the key to his own grave. Then, as he crawled over a fallen log, Samuel froze. Less than 10 feet ahead, half buried beneath leaves and mud, was something he never expected to see. A hatch. Old. Rusted. Padlocked. A hidden entrance. Another one. His breath caught. Another way in or another way out. For a moment, Samuel hesitated, his hand hovering over the rusted hatch. Every fiber of his body screamed that opening it could lead to something far worse than anything he'd already seen, but staying where he was guaranteed only one thing: capture. His ears strained, tracking the footsteps still circling the woods behind him. They were close. Too close. If he waited even a second longer, it would be over. He gripped the padlock, expecting it to be sealed tight, but to his surprise, it wasn't. The metal had corroded so badly over the years that with a sharp twist and a violent pull, it snapped clean off. Samuel shoved the hatch open, revealing a set of wooden steps descending into blackness. The smell that rose from below was suffocating: damp earth, mildew, and something else. Something metallic. Something like old blood. With no time left, Samuel climbed down, pulling the hatch closed above him just as the beam of a flashlight swept across the clearing. He crouched in total darkness, listening as the voices passed directly overhead. His pulse hammered against his ribs, each heartbeat feeling like it might give him away. But the footsteps moved on for now. He switched on his flashlight, the narrow beam cutting through the suffocating black. What he saw sent a fresh wave of dread crawling up his spine. This wasn't just a storm shelter or a root cellar. This was a passage, long, narrow, hand-carved into the earth, supported by old beams and lined with decaying shelves. Some were empty, others were filled with boxes. Dust-covered, mold-eaten boxes labeled with years. 1974, 1981, 1992. His gut clenched. More records? More evidence? Or more horror? As he stepped deeper into the tunnel, the silence became oppressive. It was the kind of silence that felt alive, like the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for him to discover something it wasn't sure should ever see the light again. The tunnel stretched far longer than Samuel expected, twisting and turning beneath the forest like the veins of something diseased. With each step, the air grew colder, thicker. His flashlight flickered, struggling against the overwhelming darkness, but he pressed forward. The walls here were different, not just dirt and stone anymore, but patches of old brickwork, remnants of something older, much older. Then, suddenly, the tunnel opened into a chamber. A wide, circular room supported by wooden beams, the ceiling arching high above, dripping with moisture. In the center stood a large table, or what was once a table. Now, it was little more than splinters and collapsed wood. Scattered around it were more boxes, but these weren't records. They were personal belongings. Clothes, shoes, toys. Samuel's breath caught when he recognized something half buried under a pile of cloth. A teddy bear, its button eyes missing, its fur stained dark. Pinned to the wall behind the pile were photographs, dozens of them, faded and curling at the edges. Faces, children, families, some smiling, some not. Written beneath many were dates. Some had names, others only numbers. Samuel's stomach churned. This wasn't just documentation. This was a gallery, a shrine. But to what? As he moved closer, his flashlight beam caught something else, a door. Heavy, reinforced, newer than anything else in the room. Unlike the rest of this forgotten place, this door had been maintained. Clean, intact. Someone still used it. Someone still came here. Samuel approached slowly, every instinct screaming to turn back. But something deeper pulled him forward, the same force that had driven the bishop decades earlier. He pressed his ear against the door. Silence. Then a sound. Faint, rhythmic, breathing. Someone, or something, was on the other side. His hand hovered over the latch, trembling. Whatever was behind this door was never meant to be found. Samuel's fingers hovered over the latch, trembling so violently it felt like the metal might slip from his grasp. His mind raced, every rational thought begging him to turn around, to escape, to pretend none of this existed. But it was far too late for that. Once you peel back a curtain like this, it never truly closes again. With a deep, shaking breath, he gripped the handle and pulled. The door resisted at first, swollen with moisture, as if the very earth was trying to hold it shut. Then, with a deafening crack, it gave way, swinging inward to reveal darkness. Not the passive kind, but a suffocating, living void that seemed to swallow the beam of his flashlight whole. Samuel stepped forward cautiously, his shoes sinking into the damp floor. And then, the smell hit him. Not musty, not old, but sharp, pungent, like copper and rot. As his light adjusted, shapes began to emerge from the black. Cages, dozens of them, some small, some large. Iron bars rusted with age, yet still standing firm. Inside, piles of decayed bedding, chains bolted into stone walls. Scratches, deep gouges etched into the rock, as though fingernails had clawed desperately, hopelessly, against their prison. Samuel's stomach lurched. How many had been trapped here? How many had never made it out? Then, from the far corner, a sound. A shuffle. A breath. Something, or someone was still here. Samuel's light snapped toward it, catching a figure curled into the corner, emaciated, filthy, barely more than a shadow. For a moment, his brain refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. But then the figure moved, slowly, weakly, lifting its head just enough to reveal hollow eyes, staring straight back at him. A voice rasped, so faint it was barely a whisper. "Helpy." Samuel stumbled back, his heart slamming into his ribs. This wasn't a ghost. This wasn't a memory. This was someone alive. Trapped. Forgotten. And the horrifying truth landed like a dagger in his chest. This wasn't a relic of the past. This nightmare was still happening. Samuel rushed forward, his instincts overtaking the suffocating fear. As he knelt beside the figure, his hands shook uncontrollably. It was a man, frail, skin stretched tightly over bone, hair matted and filthy. His wrists bore deep, raw scars where chains had once bound him. Samuel's voice cracked as he whispered, "Who? Who did this to you?" The man coughed, his lips trembling, struggling to form words. They never left, always watching, always waiting. His eyes darted frantically toward the ceiling, as if expecting someone, or something, to come crashing down at any second. Samuel ripped off his jacket, wrapping it around the man's shoulders, his mind spinning in chaos. How long had he been here? Days, weeks, years. His hands moved on autopilot, searching for anything, tools, keys, anything that could free him. That's when Samuel noticed the collar around the man's neck. Not a rope, not a chain. A leather strap, branded with a symbol burned into the surface. The same symbol Samuel had seen in the crypt's ledger. The inverted cross inside the circle. This wasn't random. This man wasn't just a prisoner. He was part of the same system, a piece of the same monstrous puzzle. The man clutched Samuel's arm with surprising strength for someone so frail. His voice sharpened, urgent. Behind the wall, records, names, everything. His fingers pointed weakly to a section of the stone wall, cracked and uneven. Samuel rushed to it, running his hands along the seams until there, a loose panel. He pried it open with trembling fingers, revealing a hollow cavity stuffed with folders, tapes, photographs, names, faces, dates, decades of proof. But before Samuel could process it, a sharp noise echoed from the tunnel. Footsteps. Multiple. Fast. Heavy. No more pretending. No more searching. They were coming. And this time, they knew exactly where he was. Samuel's breath seized in his chest as the footsteps pounded louder, closing in with terrifying precision. His eyes darted wildly between the frail man on the floor and the pile of evidence he had just uncovered. There was no time. No way to gather all. No way to carry everything and still escape alive. Panic clawed at the edges of his mind, threatening to consume him. But then, the man gripped his wrist, squeezing with surprising force. "Listen to me. The grate, under the bedding. It leads out." His voice was brittle but desperate, like a dying spark refusing to fade. Samuel shoved aside the filthy blankets in the nearest corner, revealing exactly what the man had said. A rusted iron grate, half buried in the mud and filth. He yanked at it. It didn't budge. Again. His fingers blistered. His knuckles split. And then, with a violent crack, it gave way. A narrow tunnel, even tighter than the crawl space before. Barely wide enough to squeeze through. But it was a way out, the only one. Samuel turned back to the man. "Come with me. Now." But the man shook his head, tears streaming down his sunken cheeks. No, too weak. But you take this, show them, show the world what they did. He shoved a folder into Samuel's hands, brittle, stained, but intact. A sudden explosion of wood splintered through the room as the heavy door was kicked open. Voices roared. Lights flooded the chamber. Samuel dove into the tunnel, dragging the folder with him, his knees scraping against jagged rocks, every muscle screaming. Behind him, gunshots rang out, not aimed at him, but at the man who had helped him. A scream, a final breath, then silence. Samuel crawled faster, his lungs burning, the tunnel tightening until it felt like the earth itself was crushing him. But up ahead, light, faint, a crack in the surface, an exit, freedom. He scrambled forward, pushing through layers of roots and dirt, until, with one final heave, he burst out into open air. Gasping, covered in mud and blood, Samuel collapsed into the cold grass. The tunnel had led him out to the far edge of the forest, near the abandoned railway tracks, miles from the church, miles from the town. For a long moment, he simply lay there, staring up at the sky, barely able to comprehend that he was still alive. His body ached, his skin burned, but he was out. He was free. Or was he? Even as he pulled himself to his feet, a horrifying truth gripped him. Freedom was relative. What he carried now was a death sentence. The folder pressed against his chest was heavy, not in weight, but in consequence. Inside were photographs, letters, lists, damning proof of the unspeakable horrors hidden beneath the town's holy facade. Names of the guilty, records of the victims, contracts, payments, transactions written not in ink, but in blood. As Samuel staggered toward the tracks, adrenaline still flooding his veins, he realized something even darker. This wasn't just a secret of one church. The symbols, the ledgers, the tunnels, it was bigger. Much bigger. This was an institution of shadows, an inheritance of evil stretching beyond his town, perhaps beyond anything he could have ever imagined. His phone buzzed, a notification. Weak signal, but enough. He opened it. Missed calls. Dozens. From unknown numbers. Messages from friends. Hey, there are people looking for you. Where are you? Something's wrong. Police came by asking questions. What's going on? Samuel's blood ran cold. They were already turning the gears, spinning a narrative, preparing the town, preparing the world. And he was about to become the villain in their story. As the sun began to rise on the horizon, casting pale gold light over the tracks, Samuel realized the truth. The real nightmare wasn't just what had happened beneath that church. The real nightmare was how far those who built it would go to keep it buried. Samuel limped along the abandoned railway, the cold steel beneath his feet groaning with every step, as though the earth itself protested the burden of the truth he now carried. Every shadow between the trees felt alive. Every gust of wind sounded like whispers or footsteps. He kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see figures emerging from the tree-line, dressed not in black, but in the familiar faces of his own community. Men who shook his hand on Sundays, women who smiled at his mother in the market, people who had sat beside him in prayer, while hiding hell beneath their feet. His mind wrestled with the suffocating weight of it all. Who could he trust? Who could even believe this? If he walked into the police station, he wouldn't even make it past the front desk, not in a town where the sheriff's name was in the very ledger he carried. If he ran to the press, how long before the same powerful hands twisted the story into something else? Something convenient, something that painted him not as a survivor, but as a madman. As he trudged forward, the forest thinned, revealing the outskirts of town in the distance. A familiar road, familiar houses, but they felt alien now, rotten beneath the paint, hollow beneath the laughter. He stopped at a hilltop, watching the town below wake to the morning sun. People going to work, kids boarding school buses, shopkeepers opening their stores. And none of them knew that beneath their feet was a graveyard built not of stone, but of secrets. Samuel's hands clenched into fists. His face twisted, caught between fury and despair. He wasn't just running anymore. He was carrying a fire that, if lit properly, wouldn't just expose the rot. It would burn it down, all of it. But how? How do you fight an enemy that doesn't wear a mask? Because the mask is their own face. Then, his phone buzzed again. A message. No number. Just words. "We know." The message hit Samuel like a punch to the ribs. His thumb hovered over the screen, paralyzed. Another message appeared. "Stop now. Come home. This isn't yours to fix." His blood went cold. It wasn't just a threat. It was a warning. A subtle reminder that no matter where he ran, their reach was longer. Their eyes were everywhere. For a moment, the fear nearly won. His legs trembled, his chest tightened. But then, something shifted deep within him. A spark. Maybe it was the bishop's voice echoing in his memory. Maybe it was the face of the broken man he left behind in that cellar. Or maybe it was the realization that if he didn't stand now, no one ever would. This would just happen again, and again, and again. Samuel opened the folder, flipping through its contents with frantic precision. Names, photos, receipts, letters. But then something caught his eye, a sealed envelope, tucked between the pages. Newer than the rest. Written on the front, in the same handwriting as the bishop's journal, were the words, "For whoever survives." His fingers trembled as he tore it open. Inside was a list of contact names. Not from the town, not from the church. Outsiders. People the bishop had trusted. Journalists, lawyers, investigators. People who had once tried, and failed, to fight the same darkness. Beneath the names, a final note. "They will try to silence you. But the truth, it has teeth." Samuel's heart raced. This was it. A chance. A real chance. But even as hope surged through him, headlights flickered at the bottom of the hill. A black SUV. No plates. Doors opened. Figures stepped out. Suits. Calm. Collected. Watching. Waiting. Samuel ducked, pulse hammering against his skull. They weren't searching. They already knew exactly where he was. Because in a town like this, the walls don't have ears. The people are the walls. Samuel's chest rose and fell in sharp, ragged breaths as he pressed his body deeper into the wet earth, hidden just beyond the tree line. His hands trembled as he clutched the folder against his chest, feeling every heartbeat pulse through his fingertips like thunder. The men from the SUV stood still, scanning the landscape with an eerie calmness. Not like predators searching, but like executioners waiting. They weren't in a hurry because they knew something Samuel was only now beginning to understand. No one gets out of this town. Not really. His mind raced. Running would be suicide. Hiding temporary. Fighting impossible. Unless he flipped the rules. Unless he stopped thinking like prey. Samuel wiped the mud from his face, forcing his thoughts to clear. His fingers found his phone again. The list. The bishop's last act of defiance. The names, the numbers, maybe old, maybe disconnected. But it was something. A crack in the wall. He scrolled through them frantically, his hands barely steady enough to type. One number had a note scribbled next to it. She never gave up. No name. Just that. Samuel hit call. It rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. Every second stretched into eternity. On the 4th ring, someone answered. A woman's voice. Sharp. Suspicious. Who is this? Samuel didn't waste time. I don't have time to explain. I have what Whitaker died for. They're coming. They know. They always knew. Silence. Then a sharp inhale on the other end. Where are you? The voice demanded. Stay on the line. Don't hang up. Whatever you do, don't hang up. But before Samuel could answer, movement. One of the men from the SUV turned, his gaze locking directly on where Samuel hid. For a moment, the world went perfectly, terrifyingly still. Then, he started walking toward him. Samuel's instincts exploded. He bolted from the tree line, adrenaline eclipsing pain, exhaustion, and fear. The figures shouted, sharp commands slicing through the morning air. Doors slammed. Footsteps thundered. Engines roared to life. Samuel sprinted toward the railway tracks, weaving between trees, vaulting over fallen logs, his lungs burning, his vision tunneling. The woman on the phone yelled through the speaker. Keep running. Get to open ground. Make noise, lots of it. Cameras, witnesses, anything. Her voice wasn't just advice. It was survival. Samuel's legs pushed harder. His mind locked onto a single thought. Don't let them drag you back underground. A fence appeared ahead. Chain link. Rusted. Dividing the woods from the industrial yard near the old grain mill. He threw himself against it, scrambling, scraping his hands raw as he climbed. Behind him, the SUV screeched on the gravel, tires spitting dirt. Doors flew open. Footsteps closed in. But just as a hand brushed the back of his jacket, Samuel flung himself over, hitting the ground hard on the other side. Pain exploded in his ribs, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. He sprinted into the yard, stumbling past stacks of pallets and rows of rusted machinery. And then, voices. Not them. Workers. People. A group of men hauling equipment turned, startled by the sight of Samuel barreling toward them, bloodied, wild-eyed, clutching a torn folder to his chest. Samuel's voice ripped from his throat. Call the police. Film this. Film it. The workers froze, confused. But one, a younger guy, instinctively pulled out his phone, hitting record just as the men in suits rounded the corner in pursuit. But the moment they saw the workers, the witnesses, they stopped. Abrupt. Calculated. One of them muttered into a radio. Another lowered his hands, palms out, feigning calm. But Samuel could see it in their eyes. Rage. Not the rage of men losing control, but the rage of men who had been seen. For the first time, the darkness wasn't hidden anymore. For a long, suffocating moment, the world seemed to freeze. Samuel stood hunched, gasping for air, clutching the torn folder like a shield. The men in suits remained still, hands lowered, expressions carefully blank, but beneath that facade, boiling fury. One of them took a slow step forward, lifting his hands in mock surrender, his voice smooth like oil sliding over broken glass. Let's not cause a scene, Samuel. You're confused. Let's talk. Just talk. Samuel shook his head violently, taking a staggering step back. Stay away from me. His voice cracked but carried enough force to make the nearby workers tense, eyes widening, hands tightening around phones and tools. One of them muttered, "Dude, what is going on?" Another whispered, "Is someone calling the cops?" But deep inside, Samuel knew the truth. The police wouldn't save him. Not here. Not now. Maybe not ever. The system that had allowed the bishop to vanish, that had sealed horrors behind walls, wasn't going to be undone by a phone call. Not unless the lie collapsed under the weight of witnesses. Cameras. Eyewitnesses. People who couldn't be bribed or silenced fast enough. The tension shattered like glass when one of the men lunged. Fast, precise, reaching not for Samuel, but for the folder. Samuel spun, dodging by instinct alone, his shoulder colliding with a stack of wooden pallets that tumbled loudly to the ground. The crash sent a shockwave through the yard. Workers screamed. Phones shot up. Cameras pointed. Someone shouted, "It's on video. I'm filming." The men froze. Just for a second. But in that second, Samuel bolted, slipping through the narrow gap between two containers, his feet pounding against the gravel, lungs burning with every ragged breath. He wasn't running toward safety. He was running toward exposure, toward the only weapon that could possibly save him now, the truth. Samuel burst onto the main road, nearly collapsing as cars screeched to avoid him. Horns blared. Drivers shouted. But it didn't matter. None of it mattered. All that mattered was that he was no longer in the shadows, no longer in the woods, no longer beneath the earth. The nightmare was now spilling onto the streets in broad daylight. He staggered to the middle of the intersection, throwing his arms wide, waving the folder over his head like a flare. "Film me. Somebody film me. Film this," he screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. A woman in a minivan fumbled for her phone. A man on a motorcycle slowed, pulling out his own. People stared, confused, concerned, but they stared. And they recorded. The black SUV skidded into view seconds later, stopping at the curb. The doors opened, but the men didn't step out this time. They stood there, watching, calculating. The predator's advantage, secrecy, isolation, was gone. Here, in front of witnesses, their power fractured. Not broken. Not yet. But cracked. Samuel locked eyes with the man in the front passenger seat, the one who hadn't spoken, the one whose face was calm, blank, except for the eyes. Those eyes weren't angry. They weren't even afraid. They were something worse. They were patient, as if to say, "This doesn't end here. You've only delayed it." Then, the SUV door slammed shut. Tires screeched. The vehicle peeled away, vanishing down the street like a shadow retreating at dawn. But Samuel didn't relax, didn't breathe, because this wasn't a victory. This wasn't safety. This was simply postponed. As sirens echoed in the distance, whether coming to help or to silence, Samuel realized the real war had only just begun. What was buried beneath that church wasn't just a crime. It was a system, a legacy, a sickness that didn't die. It spread. And now, it was Samuel's burden to decide, expose it, or be swallowed by it. Samuel collapsed against the curb, his entire body trembling, not just from exhaustion, but from the sheer gravity of what he now carried. Not in his backpack, but in his hands, in his memory, in his very existence. Around him, a small crowd had formed. Strangers, bystanders, ordinary people who had no idea that their lives were unfolding atop a graveyard of secrets. Secrets so dark they could rot the very foundation of everything they thought was sacred. Some filmed, others whispered, but no one intervened. No one quite knew whether Samuel was the victim or the villain. And that uncertainty, that subtle, creeping doubt, was the most powerful weapon the enemy had ever wielded. Because if you can make the truth look crazy, you never have to answer for it. The sirens grew louder, closer. Samuel's eyes darted toward the corner, half expecting the same SUV to return. But it didn't. Not yet. Instead, 2 patrol cars rounded the intersection, lights flashing, tires screeching as they came to a sudden stop. Officers stepped out, hands on holsters, expressions stiff, unreadable. One officer barked, "Hand where I can see them. Drop the bag." Samuel's fingers tightened instinctively around the folder, his mind screaming, "No, not this. Not again." His voice cracked, desperate. "I have proof. Don't let them take it. Don't let them bury this again." But even as he shouted, part of him knew it didn't matter. Not yet. Not until this was bigger than this town. Bigger than them. Visible. Public. Unstoppable. The younger officer hesitated, glancing toward the crowd, noticing the phone's recording. His grip on his weapon faltered. Doubt. Samuel saw it, and he seized it. Check the bag. Look. Look at it. Names. Photos. Dates. Look what they did. His voice rose to a scream, the kind of scream that rips straight from the soul. Raw, broken, undeniable. And for a split second, just a split second, the illusion cracked. The younger officer stepped forward, lowering his hand from his holster. He knelt cautiously beside Samuel, eyes flickering between him, the folder, and the sea of cameras now aimed like weapons in every direction. Slowly, carefully, he opened the folder and froze. His face drained of color. His fingers trembled as his eyes scanned the first page, then the second, then the third. Photos, names, ledgers, contracts, dates, faces of missing children, receipts of payments tied to rituals, to crimes, and more, correspondence between town officials, church leaders, and men whose names carried weight far beyond this small place. His lips parted, but no words came out. Just a whisper. Jesus Christ. The older officer, still gripping his weapon, stepped closer, catching a glimpse over his partner's shoulder, and his face changed too. Not confusion, not disbelief, but something far colder. Calculation, recognition, because this wasn't news to him. Not entirely. His jaw tightened, his knuckles whitened, his eyes shifted, not toward Samuel, but toward the crowd. The cameras. For a moment, no one moved. The entire street was locked in a suffocating stillness, a place where truth and power collided so violently that the world itself seemed to hold its breath. Then the officer snapped his radio from his belt. "Dispatch, we have a situation." His voice was flat, tense. Send, everyone." Samuel's breath caught. Everyone. Not help, not backup. Control. Because the game had changed. The lie wasn't hidden anymore. But now was a race. A race between the truth and the machine built to bury it. The next moments unfolded like a nightmare caught between reality and madness. More patrol cars flooded the street, lights flashing, engines roaring, officers stepping out. Some confused, others stone-faced, too calm. Samuel couldn't breathe, couldn't move. His hands clutched the folder so tightly his knuckles turned bone white, as if letting go would mean losing everything. Losing the bishop, the victims, the truth itself. The younger officer stayed frozen beside him, eyes glued to the documents as if he'd just opened the gates of hell. His hands trembled as he flipped through each page, scanning images no human should ever have to witness. But the older officer, his expression had shifted. Not fear, not disbelief, but something far darker. Familiarity. Samuel saw it clearly now. The same subtle twitch of the jaw, the same glance over the shoulder, the same tension in the shoulders that said everything without a single word spoken. He knew. Not just about the church, not just about the tunnels. He had always known. Maybe not all of it. Maybe not every terrible detail. But enough. Enough to stay quiet. Enough to survive. Radios crackled. Officers muttered into headsets. The crowd grew larger, people pressing in, filming, whispering, asking questions that no one had answers for yet. And then, an unmarked car pulled up. Black. Sleek. Two men stepped out. Suits. Badges flashed, so quickly Samuel couldn't even read them. Federal? State? Or something else entirely? The taller man pointed directly at Samuel. Secure the evidence. Move him. Now. His tone was absolute. No questions. No room for discussion. Samuel's pulse exploded. No. Don't let them take it. Don't let them. But hands were already grabbing him, hauling him to his feet, prying the folder from his grasp. Samuel thrashed, kicking, screaming, his voice a ragged blade slicing through the chaos. Film this. Don't stop filming. They're trying to bury it again. Don't let them. Don't let them. But hands dragged him back, forcing his arms behind his body, pinning him like an animal. His vision blurred with panic, fury, betrayal. Everything collapsing into a suffocating spiral. But then something shifted. From the edge of the crowd, a voice, a woman. Strong. Clear. I've got it. I streamed the whole thing. Samuel's head snapped toward her. A stranger. Her phone was held high. A live stream. Thousands watching. The chat scrolled so fast it was unreadable, but it didn't matter. It was out. Others joined her. Phones lifted. Cameras zoomed. People shouted. We saw it. We have it recorded. And suddenly, for the first time in this entire nightmare, Samuel saw something he never expected. Fear, not in himself, but in them. The men in suits. The officers. The system. Because the shadows only have power when the light refuses to look. The taller man's jaw clenched. His voice lowered, cold as ice. Get him out of here. Now. But it was too late. The lie cracks now, spreading like fractures through glass. Too many eyes. Too many witnesses. For the first time in decades, the darkness wasn't safe anymore. As Samuel was shoved into the back of the unmarked car, his heart pounded with a realization more terrifying and more powerful than anything else. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning. The town never spoke about the bishop again. Not in public, not in whispers, not even in their own prayers. What had once been a quiet mystery, wrapped in rumors and buried beneath hymns, had now erupted into something far more terrifying. Undeniable truth. A truth that stained every brick of that chapel, every handshake, every smile given by those who wore the mask of respectability while hiding horrors beneath their feet. And even though the videos spread, even though thousands watched in disbelief, the silence from the ones who mattered was louder than ever. But that's how darkness survives, isn't it? Not just through violence, but through complicity, through the quiet nods of those who look the other way, through the tired eyes of those who whisper. That's just how things are. Evil doesn't always come wearing horns. Sometimes it wears a collar. Sometimes it stands at the pulpit. Sometimes it blesses your children while burying someone else's. Samuel's story didn't end in handcuffs. It didn't end in an interrogation room. It didn't even end in that town. Because the moment the truth escaped the walls of that church, the moment it was seen, recorded, shared, it became something no machine of silence could ever fully contain again. Pieces of that horror now live in files, in memories, in footage archived by strangers who never once stepped foot in that place, but who now carry part of the truth, whether they wanted it or not. And maybe that's the lesson buried beneath all of this. That the scariest monsters are not the ones who hide in the dark, but the ones who convince you they don't exist at all. That the real fight isn't just against those who commit the crime, but against the ones who keep the secret. Because some walls aren't built to protect us. They're built to bury what should never be seen. So if this story moved you, if it shook something inside you, don't let it disappear like the bishop once did. Stay. Be part of the voice that refuses to be silenced. Subscribe to this channel, leave your thoughts in the comments, and share this video, not just to grow this community, but to make sure that stories like this are never buried again.